We should mention .mil people are, that's a military internet address.
Oh, yeah, sorry, yeah, exactly, yeah. And there's a few diplomats that read it and this kind of thing. But other than that, I just don't deal with government. I've had a couple of government agencies want to buy it, and I had to return their checks because I just won't cash a government check for this stuff. It's like, no, if you want to buy it as a personal and use it, that's fine. But, I've got to have some honor somewhere.
Well, Cliff, you mentioned that there were 3 areas that you've been right on the money with predictions. But before we go there, I promised our callers tonight, our listeners, that I would take more calls since I was guilty of not doing so the last time you were on.
Sure.
So in that spirit, let's go to line 1 and welcome Andy from Ohio on the show. Hi, Andy. What's on your mind?
Hey, Cliff. How you doing? I'm really happy to be talking to you right now on the 25th.
Well, hey, Andy. I'm doing okay. I've cut myself up a little bit doing some woodwork today, but other than that, I'm doing fine.
Well, it sounds like life is going on no matter what type of doom is coming down the line. Hey, I'm a refusenik. My family, we're all refuseniks. And I'm wondering, I have 2 questions for you. First, what are your feelings on how does this national emergency fit into, not just the refusenik movement, but, what do you feel is coming down the line with this? And then also, I'm sure you're going to get into it, but, I'm over here on East Coast time, 5:12, I'm going to be waiting up for it, see what happens in the morning.
Well, before we answer that, Cliff, go ahead and tell the audience the significance of 5:12.
5:12 a.m. is the bottom of the turn of the language. We were exiting a long stretch of release of tension language that started in the middle of August and finally completes as of 5:12 a.m. We're saying East Coast time on the 26th, so early tomorrow morning. At 5:02 to 5:12, we're going to have a period where the language from that point on will shift all the way over into building tension language. And I wouldn't wait up for it, Guy. I mean, I'm not expecting any kind of an event or anything per se because they've been accumulating. There's a huge amount of, and sleep is important. I enjoy sleep. But basically, here's what's going on. We've actually started the turn. And we know that we've started the turn because of the huge amount of building language that burst out relative to this emergency declaration, which brings us back to that particular topic. That brought out just a rush of building tension language, and I got some emails from my associate Igor, who is jumping up and down saying, "Hey, it's happening, we caught it." See, we had our servers and our spiders turned on a couple of weeks ago, and we've been tuning them so that we could catch this, because every time we come up to one of these large-scale language changes, by going back and working our data over again relative to the actual language maturing and manifesting, we get that much more accurate. So it's a real ripe time for us to get some nice fruit that helps us build better pies, so to speak. In any event, though, the language around the emergency declaration is very interesting because I think of it as the first step. I think that there's going to be another component to this, whether they declare that there's a national emergency, or rather, they don't declare a national emergency unless there's something to follow. It's kind of like saying, we're going to have a special holiday. And then they're never telling you when it is. In school, that kind of a deal. You'd be left hanging. And so we're all left hanging, and this is building tension language. So to a certain extent, we're all waiting to see what this national emergency stuff is going to mean here for us in the U.S. And the building tension language in China has already started to manifest. There's been a number of articles on, let's see now, we had the declaration on Saturday, so really that was when the first mass of the language started to turn. But as of 5 a.m. on October 26th, we'll be in building tension until the November 3rd. There won't be much in the way of release language anymore. So the refusenik component's going to come on up, and it's interesting that I read that the first kids won't be vaccinated. And now we're seeing more and more of the language come out about the dual nature of the vaccines, that if you work for the uniformed services or government, you get, quote, the good stuff from Novartis. And if you're a peon or a riffraff or, whatever they think of the rest of us, you're given the other stuff from the other company. It's like curious, Again, building tension language component there. But getting back to China real quick, we've seen the turn there as well. There are a number of articles that came out today, one of which was related to the shipping index out of Shanghai and its rather precipitous drop, and another one was about a a series of policy statements coming out of the Chinese government that do not bode well for the upcoming bond auction this week. So I wouldn't wait up for it, but you'll know it by Wednesday or Thursday. You'll be able to feel what the building tension language is. But this is a turn, not a tipping point. There's a difference, and it's difficult to explain how the difference without actually having the visuals to show you. But a tipping point like 9/11, that was that was an event that we were, able to see as a cluster of all these tight points.
Well, let's hold that thought right there, Cliff, because we're running up against the break. But I think it's important to distinguish between the tipping point and the turn before we go forward so we can identify what we're talking about, tipping points or turns. Stay tuned, everybody. More with Cliff and with Annie after a word from our sponsors. From the Alta Report, and we've reached that monumental day of October 25th, and we're trying to lay out what that potentially means. And as we went to the break, Cliff was starting to distinguish between a turning point with an event and what would constitute a tipping point. So, Cliff, I'm just going to turn that back over to you and let you run with it.
Sure. We actually have three different types of major changes in the language we've been able to extract out of our work over the last 10 years. The first was a tipping point where basically all the data all focused in on a single event, and we knew life would never be the same for anybody thereafter. And a good example was the attacks on 9/11. The second is a turning point where turning points are a little bit more difficult to describe because basically it's a shift from one kind of tension to another kind. And we have two different kinds, release tension values and building tension. Release of tension doesn't mean that there's no tension. It merely means that kind of language that you would use if you were suddenly startled and you gasped out and said, oh, whew, when you realized that, it really wasn't a ghost there or whatever, and you're relieved, or you're expressing an emotion. Building tension is the inrush of air that and the hardening of the abdomen and the words that are associated with that kind of a feeling. We have a third kind, which is a context change, which is a broader, much more diffuse kind of thing, and a context change can be typified by the language shift that occurred in the U.S. when we started having the undocumented workers, illegal immigrants, however you want to define them, march en masse and start trying to make their presence known. That was a huge shift in the context. We're right in the midst, and as of 5 in the morning, on the 26th, we will have made the turn within our data sets into a new kind of language for us, which is this next period of building tension. It appears to be about 85% focused on the economy and financial stuff, with some of it focused, some of the remainder, the 15% remaining, focused on almost equally split, really, between the vaccine issues and the Middle East/war issues. But we're going to be in this kind of like held breath kind of a stage for probably about 10 days. Now, most of the regular humans out there sitting around going to work and stuff, we may not even notice that the level of tension that's increasing behind the scenes initially, but you'll sure feel it by the time we get to November 3rd or 4th or 5th. We actually see it sort of peaking on the 5th. And
do people who don't know about the Alta Report and the Webbot, do you often hear things like, I've just got a bad feeling in my gut?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Kind of lines up with what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I get this email from this guy in Jamaica that says, I feel dread, very dread. It's like, yeah, guy, I got it. I'm feeling that myself. And you do. You can wake up some days and you just have a feeling, Well, it's this kind of feeling en masse that we're going to go through here, and we'll all start kind of clustering around things in a central sort of a focus over these next 10 days. And then there's going to be some release, and it may involve international diplomacy. We just don't know what's going on there.
So
there are a number of indicators.
This turning point, I should say we change directions, but this could lead to a series of tipping points down the road?
They're not connected. There will be tipping points. It's not that they're causal. Mm-hmm. Tipping points are a strange thing in and of themselves, but no, they're not necessarily causal. But we do have some in the offing. Yes, a minor one and then a real big one in 2011.
Well, we're going to have to really come back and explore that when we come back from the break. Jeff from Indiana, you're up first when we come back from the break. And for all of you who've written in with your email questions, we'll get to those, or as many of those as we can as well. Stay tuned, everybody. We'll see you on the other side. Number 2 of the Common Sense Show. Hi, everybody. This is your host, Dave Hodges, and also joining me tonight is Annie DeRiso, who's being a little on the quiet side. Annie, jump into this whenever you want. And our very special guest tonight is Clif from the Webbot Report. And before we go back to what Clif had brought up just as we went into the break about 2 tipping point events coming, one in 2011, I know these calls and these email questions are backing up. So let's try to relieve some tension of our own by going out to the lines and welcoming Jeff from Indiana on line 2. Hi, Jeff. What's on your mind?
Hey there. Thanks very much for taking my call, Clif. We love you. Thanks so much for everything you're doing, for helping us out so much. I've got 2 questions. If you can only answer one, just hit the second one. First, I'm wondering if it's still the case that the idea that there's going to be a gun roundup or, where the government tries to get all our guns or ban them is just as much of a hoax as the mass vaccine idea is a hoax. And then the second question, much more important, in the real hardcore areas of conspiracy theory, many say that there's going to be a future where we don't have families and there's a New World Order religion that's imposed upon us all. Do you see any of that coming in the future?